Hello, sixth grade. Here I am again with another dividing without a calculator. This time it's decimals. So the first thing I need to do in order to do this problem is I'm saying without a calculator, but you will have a bunch of choices. And if I'm going to do this problem, I know that the first number goes on the inside. And by that, it goes on the inside of what I call a house. So you have to write it very carefully. If you're not really neat, you might want to get some graph paper. During PSSAs, you are allowed to use graph paper, and graph paper might help you. And each number then can go inside one of the little graph boxes. So I always say the first thing you need before you want to divide into the house. So the divisor's on the outside. This is the divisor here. Before you want to divide into the house, you want to make sure that you have a decimal doormat. So here's my decimal right now. I need to move that decimal 2 places in order to have a decimal doormat. Before you can divide, go into the house, you need to have that decimal doormat. And whatever I do outside of my house, 2 times outside, I need to then move the decimal 2 times inside. And then once I move it, I want to move it right up to the answer. And now I'm just going to divide it like it's a regular whole numbers. And recall, the does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers system? And that's the first thing I want to do is divide. So I actually just usually skip the zeros. I'm one of those people that just skips those because it's too many zeros to be dividing all the way through. So I'm going to know that 8 goes into 0 times. That 0 doesn't really count because the only place that really starts to matter is that place right above that ones place. But I'm going to put a 0 there anyway. And then 8 goes into the other 0. It's going to be 0 times once again. Now, since it's an actual number, I am going to start doing the does McDonald's sell cheeseburger system. Divide, multiply, I'm going to abbreviate, subtract, check, I call that a check, and then bring down. That's the system for dividing. Some people do it differently. This is how the old-time version that I do it. I use kind of the old-fashioned version of doing it. Now, I'm going to, 8 goes into 5, divide it, it goes in 0 times. And then I know that 0 times 8, that's the multiply part, is 0. Next step is the S for subtract, and I'm going to subtract 5 minus 0 is 5. My next step, I want to check. I got to check to make sure the 5, the subtracted answer, the difference, was less than the divisor, the 8. And it was. So now, because that's true, I can bring down my 6. Now remember, every time you bring down, if you bring down, you must go back up to the top and divide. If you bring down, you must go back up to the top to divide. Now I'm going to divide 8 divided into 56. 8 goes into 56. I know that 8 times 7 is 56. So it's going to be 7 times. Now I'm going to multiply 8 times 7 times 8. And I get 56. And finally, I get a remainder of 0. And I now know that my answer, these zeros do not matter, but I do like to have a 0 in the base place. The ones is what I call the base place. So typically, when you have a decimal, you would put 7/10 as your answer. So I'm going to say these numbers correctly too, because that's always important. 56 thousandths divided by 8 hundredths equals 7/10. If I wanted to check this, I can check this by multiplying. I'm going to review multiplying with you right here now and now too. And when I'm multiplying, I usually take the number with, I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to do the inverse operation, and I'm going to multiply 8 hundredths times 7/10. Notice when I add and subtract decimals, I line them up. But when I multiply decimals, I do not. When I multiply decimals, I deal with the decimal at the end. When I add and subtract, I line them up and bring them down. When I divide, I deal with the decimal first with the decimal doormat. In this case, multiplying decimals, I'm going to multiply first. 8 times 7 is 56. And then last but not least, how do I check? Well, you may recall that decimals, I have to check how many digits are to the right of the decimal. So there's a 0 and there's an 8 to the right of the decimal. So that's 2. And in the next factor, it's 1 because there's just a 7. So how many total digits? There are 3 total digits to the right of the decimals. And that tells me how many times I need to move my decimal. 1, 2, 3 times. And remember, the zeros are like eggs in egg crates, or I say you want to put the zeros between the waves. So that's my answer. But I do want to rewrite this with my decimal in my new location. And if you notice, it does work out because I multiplied backwards. I did 7 tenths times 8 hundredths, and the answer then was the original dividend. So you can do the inverse operation. So that was kind of a review of multiplying and dividing decimals at the same time. Good luck on those PSSAs,